We recall that last week Jesus sent off the apostles 2 by 2 to go and minister to the sick and to heal those that have any diseases, or just spreading the word of God. And so we fast forward now to the end of Mark's chapter 6. And what happens is the apostles come back. And of course, what are they going to do? They go to Jesus and they tell him all that they had done and taught. And what happened is, well, people were still coming to them and coming in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. They were so busy they couldn't even eat. I think we've all been there before, haven't we, probably, right? Especially as I look out at all the parents. Some days, there's probably days you're like, well, the kids ate, but we didn't, right? Or sometimes with work as well. You just have to get one thing done after another, and you're just busy. You know what we call that? Life. That's what that is. It happens. And yet, what does Jesus say to them? He doesn't say to them, okay, let's go do it again. This is amazing, I think, and beautiful, and quite the lesson in here as well. He says, come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. People are still coming to them. And yet Jesus says, let's get out of here. This shouldn't be a surprise either. Jesus does it all the time. He escapes. He goes to the top of a mountain to pray. He goes to a deserted place to pray. Even after the Last Supper, what does he do? They go to Mount of Olives, and he goes and he prays. He goes and has solitude. Solitude. It's C.S. Lewis who states in his book, The Weight of Glory, we live, in fact, in a world starved for solitude, silence, and private, and therefore starved for meditation and true friendship. You know, in the last 10, 15 years, there have been a ton of studies done on the importance of solitude in our information age. You can't go any place without seeing one of these. I mean, your pastor has one by the pulpit right now. And don't worry, I'm not checking the British Open score, okay? Don't worry about it. It's on airplane mode, and we're recording the homily. But it seems like all the time we have information coming to us over and over and over again, and it just can be an influx of information. This isn't new. It's always happened. We can go back, this is in American history, go back to Lincoln and the Civil War, and how he had to seek out solitude. We go to World War II, and there's a great example of Dwight Eisenhower. And it was actually this past winter, I was trying to seek some solitude, by the way. I was on an ice fishing trip with one of my buddies, and we were talking about how we could become better leaders, better shepherds. And he went to me and said, you know, one of the most important things that you're doing is what you're doing right now. You're escaping. And in doing so, you're going to have better clarity. And I was like, Danny, you're making that up. You just want to make me feel better, right? Because I'm not catching any fish. You want to make me feel better, right? Or something like that. And he goes, no, it's true. I heard a podcast on it. So he actually played the podcast. And this podcast was the guest on the podcast. His name was Mike Irwin. Mike Irwin graduated from West Point in 2002 or 2003. And after that, he did counterintelligence for 13 years. And after that, he was an instructor at West Point on leadership. Well, in 2009, West Point had a speaker come and speak to all the incoming cadets. And his name, maybe you've heard of him before, maybe not, is William Deweskitz. And William Deweskitz was a professor from Yale. And the talk that he gave was on solitude and leadership. If you Google that, you'll see that this article, his talk that he gave, has been read over 3 million times. So once again, it's solitude and leadership, and it says, if you want others to follow, learn to be alone with your thoughts. And so, of course, Mike Irwin said, well, I'm studying leadership. So for the next 7 years, he studied this philosophy. And he went on and looked at all the different leaders. And one of the leaders that he looked at was Eisenhower. And he saw when Eisenhower had solitude, it brought clarity. When Pearl Harbor happened, Eisenhower was just a lieutenant colonel. I say just, that's a big responsibility, but it's not huge. But at that time, General Marshall summoned him to the Pentagon. So he flew him across the country. And he brought Eisenhower in. He said, what do you think we should do? Mind you, this is right after Pearl Harbor. They really didn't have too many plans. And Eisenhower, you know what he said to him? Give me 2 hours to think about it. and to write down my thoughts. And sure enough, Eisenhower does this. He comes back to Marshall. And from that moment on, Marshall put complete trust into Eisenhower. Within 36 months, Eisenhower was the five-star general in charge of all the military operations. Why? Because Marshall saw that he had clarity in the midst of chaos. You fast forward, you go to D-Day. Once again, Eisenhower is in charge of this operation. And talk about information overload. And talk about a weighty decision as well. Eisenhower knew no matter what decision he made, to go on the day they did or to delay 2 weeks, lives were going to be lost. He had this huge responsibility upon him. And he's getting information after information after information. He has to discern it all. But guess what? We're not computers. We can't discern information always in the moment. We can't just put it on a formula. So what does Eisenhower do? He steps away. He walks out of the room. He goes and looks over the sea for 10 minutes. And he gathers his thoughts. The decision was made. And of course, we know the success, for the most part, of D-Day. What we call this in the secular world is going to be analytical solitude. What this is, it's a type of clarity you achieve when there's an intense amount of information coming your way, doing the heavy working and heavy thinking. We need to do this. Jesus had to do this as well. Look at the Last Supper. All this information, knowing what lays ahead of him. And what does he do? He withdraws into solitude. So there's the analytical way, and then we're also called to have intuitive solitude as well. What does intuitive mean? This is when we quiet our mind down and allow ourselves to listen to our gut, to our intuition. We need to quiet our mind so we can listen. Obviously, a secular way of doing this, and it's all good ways, by the way, is maybe when you go for a run. You ever heard of the runner's high before? Maybe you've experienced that when you're exercising and all of a sudden you have this clarity come over you. Maybe it's when you're going for a walk. Maybe it's when you're weeding weeds in front of the church. There's a plug for that as well, right? Maybe it's when you're ice fishing and your mind shuts down. This actually is good because it can bring clarity. And this is stuff we're called to do all the time. The secular word, we're going to call this meditation. In the church world, we call it something much better. We call it prayer. And how important it is to pray every day. Once again, in the secular where they say if a leader, if a CEO, or just any type of employee could take 20 minutes of meditation in the morning and in the evening, they're going to be a better employee. So much more for us as well. Not so much to be an employee, to be a father, to be a mother, to be a sibling, to be a friend. We can't always just be in the midst of it. Sometimes we have to step back. And of course, we have to bring it to prayer, to go to God in that solitude, and to listen to what He is saying to us. Once again, we see this happen with the apostles. They reported all that they had done. And what does Jesus say? Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. To rest with God will bring so much clarity. And it's going to make you a better son or daughter of God. Mike Irwin went on in his book, by the way, to talk about another leader, Pope John Paul II, and how he would always try to seek out that silence in the midst of chaos, in the midst of his life. Maybe I've shared this before in a homily, but Pope John Paul II, we know, did a holy hour every single day. Not a surprise there, right? He's the Pope. As a priest, I try to do a holy hour every single day as well. But what happened is he'd be in prayer in his chapel, and there's beautiful pictures of this too. He's sitting in a chair, he's right in front of the monstrance, and there's chairs behind him, and people would line up behind him praying. But sometimes his aides would come to him and try to get him out of prayer because there was a huge decision that had to be made or something came up. And every single time that happened, Pope John Paul II would sense that they were there. And you know what he would do? He'd pray for another hour. And his aides would go to him and say, didn't you know that I needed you? And he goes, I did. That's why I prayed even more. Because I wanted to have that clarity for this decision. And to let God be part of it as well. Solitude brings clarity. We're able to leave and be with God and say, what do you want to happen here? Once again, it's not just for leaders. It's for all of us. And by the way, we know what's going to happen. Life's going to happen. Life happened for Jesus and the apostles as well. They hopped on the boat. They got away for a while. They show up on the other shore, and what happens? People are waiting for them. Guess what? The cycle starts again. Jesus was moved with pity for them, and he began to teach. If we fast forward here in Mark's gospel, it's then the feeding of the 5,000. And yet this is life. This is our own life as well. We will be busy sometimes, and other times we won't be. That's a good thing. But once again, even in the midst of that busyness, what we're called to do every single day is at least take some time to step away. And then sometimes to step away for a farther amount of time as well. It's not going to hurt you. It's going to help you. And God will be part of it. And so we live this cycle. We live this cycle of giving everything we have, just like the apostles did. And then we go away for a while. And we rest. And this goes back and forth over and over again. And when we do this, we'll have that clarity, and we'll know that God is with us in the midst of all.